Neil Oliver is tonight's outsider. So move over COVID. The elites are back with another terror campaign to scare you witless. Oh, this time it's the end of civilization. A new climate change report from the UN today warns time is running out for humanity to avoid a dangerous global warming catastrophe. The update from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says we're a, quote, ticking time bomb skating on thin ice unless we stop burning fossil fuels. The UN is now calling on countries like the UK to, quote, fast forward the deranged march to net zero by 10 years to 2040, regardless of how cold or skint it leaves us. Now, for the record, the UK has already cut its greenhouse gases by more than 40% over recent decades, and we're responsible for less than 1% of global emissions. So, Neil Oliver, when people like Greta Thunberg, right, make similar doomsday claims, like this now deleted tweet from 2018, where she said a top climate scientist is warning climate change will wipe out all of humanity unless we stop using fossil fuels over the next 5 years. Neil, given we're still here, still hearing the same rubbish from the UN, how are we expected to take any of this seriously?
Well, we mustn't take any of it seriously, Dan. I think most importantly of all, we should notice where we're being nudged, and more than anything else, perhaps, we should notice the wider context. You know, look at what you've already been talking about tonight. The whole Partygate thing, you know, whether or not they had cake or not was not the point. The point was that they weren't scared when they all colluded, Labour and Tory, to scare their constituents into obedience. That was the whole point. You've already talked about how the SNP is imploding. That's a significant political story. People are increasingly suspicious, it wasn't on your show tonight, but about the real motivations for the war in Ukraine that's immiserating millions of people in that country. It's all going on. You know, there's a great deal going on that people are rightly watching. And what happens? The IPCC gets pushed on stage yet again by the UN. They come clattering on stage to distract everybody from the real world issues. You know, this millenarian concept of the end of the world has been used to frighten people for hundreds, if not thousands of years. You've got to pay attention not to what's being said, but to when it's being said. That is the important point. People are noticing all sorts. You know, the banks are getting shaky all over the world. People are worried about leaving their savings in the bank. People have cost of lockdown crisis to deal with. There's all sorts of stuff going on, and a floundering establishment out there thinks, right, how do we get people looking the other way while we seek to deal or not deal with whatever it is we've got going on? Oh yes, we'll tell them it's the end of the world. You know, the virus, COVID, was invisible. What else can we threaten them with that they can't see or do anything about? I know. We'll bring back on climate change and tell them it's the end of the world.
Totally. You're so right, Neil. But why do you think the media just laps this up? I mean, tonight, for research purposes, before I tuned into Jubes & Co, I had a look at how the BBC News at 6, the ITV News at 6:30 was covering this story. I mean, they might as well be the propaganda arm of the United Nations. It feels like they actually get off on trying to scare British people now. They're addicted to it, Neil. What's that about?
Journalism, media, it has an existential crisis going on. You and I have both been in the business of journalism for decades. It's not what it was. No, the motivations behind journalism are not what they once were. You know, that appetite for digging down, you know, finding the truth, getting up in people's faces, asking difficult questions, that's gone. The media, journalists in the main, are mouthpieces for vested interests. You know, that is the real danger here, and we have got to pay attention to that. You ask the question, why journalists are doing it. They've always done it. From the 1880s to the 1940s, there were stories about the climate getting warmer. There was global warming then. You know, then up until the 1960s, we were told it began to get colder. The 1960s and 70s, there were headlines about icebergs on the Thames, polar bears in London, and all the rest of it. Now, in the 80s and 90s, Al Gore, Greta of Thunberg, and the rest pushing, the climate warming once again. The
totally.
media have
Greta Thunberg, who deleted. No, they do. And Greta Thunberg, who deleted out her tweet, because guess what? 5 years later, we're still here and we're still listening to the same rubbish from her and the United Nations. Neil Oliver, thank you so much.
The world may end at some point, but it will not end because of anthropogenic climate change. That is not the problem. Look around everybody at everything else. That's the problem.
Indeed. Neil Oliver back Saturday, 6 o'clock here on GB News. Brilliant stuff.